What happens when one of the most respected journalists in television sits down with royalty turned Hollywood, and what starts as a simple interview about new beginnings turns into an absolute disaster caught on live television? In just 35 seconds, a single comment would shatter the entire conversation and lead to one of the most shocking exits in talk show history. Anderson Cooper has built his entire career on asking the tough questions. He doesn't back down. He doesn't shy away from uncomfortable truths. And he certainly doesn't let anyone, no matter how famous, walk all over him in his own studio. For decades, viewers have trusted him to get to the heart of every story, to push past the rehearsed answers and find something real. So when Meghan Markle walked onto the set of 60 Minutes, everyone expected a revealing conversation. What nobody expected was the absolute chaos that was about to unfold. The interview started normally enough. Anderson welcomed Meghan to the show, and she smiled that practiced smile she had perfected over years in the spotlight. They talked about her new projects, her life in California, the changes she had gone through. Everything seemed perfectly fine. Anderson was his usual self, professional, prepared, asking questions that were direct but fair. Meghan answered with the kind of polished responses that sounded like they had been written by a team of publicists. But then, Anderson did what Anderson does best. He asked a real question, not a softball. Not something designed to make her look good. A real, honest question about the contradictions between what she says publicly and what people close to the situation have reported. And that's when everything changed. "I think there's some confusion among the public," Anderson said, leaning forward slightly in that way he does when he's about to make a point. "You've spoken a lot about wanting privacy, about wanting to step away from the spotlight, but you've also done multiple interviews, a documentary series, a book. Can you help people understand how those two things go together?" The smile on Meghan's face flickered. Just for a second, but it was enough. "I think that's a very reductive way of looking at it, Anderson," she replied, her voice taking on an edge that hadn't been there before. "When you've been silenced for as long as I was, telling your truth isn't seeking attention. It's reclaiming your narrative." Anderson nodded slowly, the way he does when he's processing an answer. "I understand that perspective, but some would argue that doing interview after interview, that's not reclaiming a narrative. That's building a brand. How would you respond to that?" And there it was. The moment everything shifted. Meghan sat up straighter in her chair, her expression hardening. "Some would argue?" she repeated, her voice rising slightly. "Who is some, Anderson? Do you mean you? Because it sounds like you're hiding behind hypothetical critics instead of just saying what you really think." The studio went quiet. You could feel the tension through the screen. Anderson didn't flinch. He's been in tough interviews before. He's sat across from world leaders, from criminals, from people far more intimidating than a former actress. "I'm asking the questions that a lot of viewers have," he said calmly. "That's my job, and I think they're fair questions." "Fair?" Meghan's voice was sharp now, cutting. "What's fair about constantly questioning my motives? What's fair about acting like everything I do is calculated when I'm just trying to live my life and support my family?" Anderson kept his composure, his voice steady and professional. "I'm not questioning your motives. I'm asking you to clarify what appears to be a contradiction. You're a public figure who has chosen to remain in the public eye while also criticizing the public eye. People find that confusing." "People," Meghan said, and there was something almost mocking in the way she said it. "Or you, Anderson? Because right now, it feels like you invited me here just to tear me down. Is that what this is? Did you bring me on your show just so you could have your moment?" The accusation hung in the air. Anderson's expression didn't change, but you could see something flash in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or perhaps disappointment that the conversation had taken this turn. I invited you here to have an honest conversation, he said quietly. That's what I do with every guest. I don't do puff pieces. If that's what you were expecting, then perhaps there was a miscommunication with your team? Meghan laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was the kind of laugh that cuts, that dismisses. An honest conversation, she repeated. Right. An honest conversation where you get to decide what honest means. Where you get to frame every question to make me look bad. I've done enough of these, Anderson. I know how this game works. This isn't a game, Anderson replied, and for the first time, there was a slight edge to his voice. Still professional, still controlled, but firmer. I'm a journalist. You agreed to come on this program, knowing that I ask substantive questions. If you're not comfortable answering them, that's your choice, but don't act like I'm doing something wrong by doing my job. That's when Meghan stood up. Not slowly, not casually. She stood up abruptly, her hands gripping the arms of the chair. Your job, she said, her voice getting louder. Your job is to sit here in your comfortable studio, with your comfortable life, and judge people you know nothing about. Your job is to pretend you're objective while you push whatever narrative gets you the best ratings. Anderson remained seated, looking up at her with that same calm expression. My job is to ask questions. That's what journalism is. I'm sorry if you find that threatening, but I've asked you nothing that I wouldn't ask anyone else in your position. My position? Meghan shot back. And what position is that, Anderson? The position of someone who's been attacked and criticized and lied about for years? The position of someone who had to leave everything behind just to protect her own mental health? You have no idea what my position is like. You're right, Anderson said, and his voice was gentle now. Not confrontational, but not backing down either. I don't know what that's like, but I'm giving you the opportunity right now on national television to explain it, to tell your side. But instead of doing that, you're attacking me for asking reasonable questions. Meghan shook her head, and when she spoke again, her words came out fast and angry. Reasonable questions. Do you know what's not reasonable? Being interrogated every single time I try to speak. Being treated like I'm some kind of liar or manipulator just because I won't stay quiet. You know what, Anderson? I thought you, of all people, would understand. I thought someone with your background, with your experience, would have some empathy. But I guess I was wrong. My background? Anderson asked, his eyebrows raising slightly. What does my background have to do with this? Oh, come on, Meghan said, and there was something almost cruel in her tone now. You know exactly what I mean. I thought you'd understand what it's like to be different, to be judged, to have people constantly questioning who you are. But instead, you're just like all the rest of them, another person in power using that power to punch down. The studio was dead silent. Anderson stared at her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was ice cold. I think we need to take a break, he said, looking directly into the camera. But Meghan wasn't done. A break? She said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Of course. Take a break. Cut away. Edit this however you want. That's what you people always do, isn't it? Control the narrative. Well, I'm not going to sit here and let you do that to me. Not again. Anderson turned back to her, and now there was something harder in his expression. Not angry, but done. Finished. I've been nothing but respectful to you since you walked in here, he said, his voice low but firm. I've asked you direct questions, yes, but I've given you every opportunity to answer them honestly. Instead, you've turned this into something it didn't need to be. You've made accusations about my character, about my intentions, and you've tried to make this about me when it was supposed to be about you and your story. My story, Meghan interrupted, but Anderson kept talking. If you don't want to be here, if you don't want to have this conversation, then don't be here. But don't stand in my studio and accuse me of being some kind of bully when all I've done is my job. I've interviewed presidents, dictators, survivors of unimaginable trauma. I've asked hard questions of everyone, and I've never once pretended to be something I'm not. So if you want to leave, leave. But don't you dare stand there and act like I'm the villain in your story. The words landed like punches. Meghan's face flushed red. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "You're unbelievable," she finally said, her voice shaking. "Absolutely unbelievable. I came here in good faith, and this is what I get. This is exactly why people don't trust the media. This is exactly why people like you are the problem." Anderson stood up now, and even though his voice remained calm, there was steel in it. "I think this interview is over," he said simply. "Oh, it's over," Meghan snapped. "It's been over. You ended it the moment you decided to ambush me with your agenda." "I don't have an agenda," Anderson replied. "I have questions. Questions that a lot of people want answers to. But clearly, you're not interested in answering them." Meghan grabbed her bag from beside the chair. "I'm not interested in being your punching bag," she said. "I'm not interested in playing your games. And I'm certainly not interested in being disrespected in front of millions of people." "Nobody disrespected you," Anderson said, and there was almost sadness in his voice now. "I asked you questions. That's not disrespect. That's journalism. If you can't tell the difference, that says more about you than it does about me." That was it. The final straw. Meghan's eyes went wide, and she pointed a finger at Anderson. "How dare you?" she said, her voice trembling with rage. "How dare you psychoanalyze me? How dare you sit there in your position of privilege and tell me what my problem is? You don't know me. You don't know what I've been through, and you certainly don't get to tell me what respect looks like." Anderson didn't respond. He just stood there, watching her, waiting. The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and heavy. Finally, Meghan turned toward the exit, but before she left, she turned back one more time. "You're going to regret this, Anderson," she said, her voice low and threatening. "You're going to regret treating me like this, because people are going to see this, and they're going to know exactly who you really are." Anderson met her gaze steadily. "They're going to see exactly what happened here," he said quietly. "An interview where I asked fair questions and you couldn't handle it. That's what they'll see, and I'm perfectly fine with that." Meghan stared at him for another second, her jaw clenched tight. Then she turned and walked off the set. Her heels clicked loudly against the floor, echoing through the silent studio. A producer rushed over to Anderson, speaking quietly to him, but he just shook his head and straightened his jacket. After a moment, Anderson looked directly into the camera. His face was composed, professional, but you could see the tension around his eyes. "We're going to take a commercial break," he said to the viewers at home. "When we come back, we'll continue with the rest of tonight's program." But backstage, things were not calm. Meghan was yelling at her publicist, her voice carrying through the hallways. "I told you this was a mistake," she was saying, loud enough for the crew to hear. "I told you he was going to do this. But nobody listens to me. Nobody ever listens to me." Her publicist was trying to calm her down, trying to guide her toward the exit, but Meghan wasn't having it. "No," she said, pulling her arm away. "No, I want everyone to know what just happened in there. I want everyone to know how I was treated." A security guard approached, speaking in low, soothing tones, but Meghan's voice only got louder. "Don't tell me to calm down," she snapped. "I have every right to be angry. That man just humiliated me on national television." Back on the set, Anderson was being briefed by his producers. They were asking if he wanted to address what happened, if he wanted to explain his side when they came back from commercial. He shook his head. "No," he said simply. "The interview speaks for itself. Anyone watching saw exactly what happened. I don't need to explain or defend anything." One of the producers nodded, then hesitated. "She's making quite a scene backstage," they said carefully. "Security's going to have to escort her out if she doesn't leave soon." Anderson closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "Then let them do their job," he said. "I'm going to do mine." When the show came back from commercial, Anderson was seated at his desk, looking directly into the camera with that same steady, trustworthy expression that had made him one of the most respected journalists in America. "Welcome back," he said, his voice even and professional. "As you just saw, tonight's interview with Meghan Markle ended earlier than planned. We'll be moving on to our next segment now." And that was it. No dramatics, no long explanation, no attempt to justify or defend. Just a simple statement of fact and a move forward. Because that's who Anderson Cooper is. A professional, a journalist, someone who asks tough questions and doesn't apologize for doing his job. Meanwhile, Meghan was finally being escorted from the building by security. Her publicist walked beside her, speaking urgently into a phone, already trying to do damage control. But the damage was done. The interview had been live. Millions of people had watched the whole thing unfold in real time. There was no taking it back, no editing it down, no controlling the narrative. As Meghan's car pulled away from the studio, Anderson was already deep into his next segment, interviewing a scientist about climate change. He asked probing questions, listened carefully to the answers, pushed back when something didn't make sense. In other words, he did exactly what he always does. His job. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. On one side, a journalist who stayed calm, professional, and focused on the work. On the other side, someone who couldn't handle being asked direct questions, who lashed out when challenged, who turned a simple interview into a dramatic spectacle. The next segment went smoothly. So did the one after that. Anderson moved through the rest of his show with the same steady professionalism he always brought to his work. If the earlier confrontation had rattled him, he didn't show it. He just kept doing what he does best. Asking questions. Seeking truth. Holding people accountable. By the time the show ended, social media was already exploding with reactions. Some people defended Meghan, saying the questions were too harsh, that Anderson had been unfair. But most people saw it differently. They saw a respected journalist doing his job and a celebrity who couldn't handle being treated like everyone else. They saw someone who talks constantly about authenticity and truth, but who fell apart the moment she was asked to defend her own contradictions. Anderson didn't check social media. He never does after a show. He packed up his notes, thanked his crew, and headed home. Because for him, this was just another day at work, another interview, another person who didn't like being asked tough questions. He'd seen it 1,000 times before, and he'd see it 1,000 times again. But what made this different, what made this moment so striking, was the sheer entitlement on display. The assumption that being famous, being royal, being part of a certain narrative meant you should be exempt from scrutiny. The belief that asking questions was the same as attacking, that journalism was the same as persecution. Anderson Cooper has made his career on rejecting exactly that kind of thinking. He treats everyone the same. Presidents and actors, heroes and villains, saints and sinners. Everyone gets asked the tough questions. Everyone has to defend their positions. Everyone has to deal with the reality that their words and actions have consequences. And when someone can't handle that, when someone melts down on live television because they expected softballs and got real journalism instead, well, that tells you everything you need to know. Not about the journalist, but about the person sitting across from him. The interview lasted less than 20 minutes from start to finish, but in that short time, it revealed so much. About the media, about celebrity, about the difference between wanting to tell your truth and wanting to control everyone else's perception of you, about the gap between how some people see themselves and how they actually behave when challenged. Anderson didn't set out to create a viral moment. He didn't plan for the interview to end the way it did. He just did what he always does. Asked questions, listened to answers, followed up when those answers didn't make sense. Stayed calm when things got heated. Maintained his professionalism even when the person across from him lost theirs. That's what real journalism looks like. Not attacks. Not gotcha moments. Not trying to destroy someone. Just questions. Honest, direct, fair questions. And if someone can't handle that, if someone sees those questions as attacks, that's not the journalist's problem. That's theirs. The interview will be remembered for a long time. Not because Anderson did anything wrong, but because he did everything right. He showed what it means to be a real journalist in an age where everyone wants to control their own narrative. He demonstrated that being famous doesn't mean being above scrutiny. And he proved that sometimes the most revealing thing about a person is how they react when they don't get the interview they thought they deserved. Meghan Markle walked into that studio expecting a platform. She expected soft questions and sympathy. She expected to be treated like someone special, someone exempt from the normal rules of journalism. Instead, she got Anderson Cooper, and she couldn't handle it. That's the real story here. Not that a journalist asks tough questions. That's what journalists are supposed to do. The story is what happened when someone who positions herself as a victim of unfair treatment got treated exactly the same as everyone else, and revealed that equality, real equality, wasn't actually what she wanted at all. Anderson Cooper ended his show that night the same way he ends every show, with dignity, professionalism, and a commitment to the truth. Meanwhile, Meghan Markle's car disappeared into the night, carrying someone who had just learned a hard lesson about the difference between respect and deference, between journalism and public relations, between asking for empathy and demanding immunity from criticism. The studio lights dimmed, the crew packed up, and somewhere Anderson Cooper went home, knowing he'd done his job exactly the way